Howdy, friends. I'm Joel Empey, and welcome to another episode of Joel Empey Talks NFL. And on today's episode, we're going to talk fantasy football. We're going to talk bets that I like this week, top suicide survivor picks of the week, what I learned from week 2 in the NFL. But first, I wanted to talk to you about a theory that I had read on NFL.com years ago that I think still applies to this day. Now, this theory is called the Andy Dalton equilibrium, or the Andy Dalton theory. And it's basically a theory that states that Andy Dalton is sort of represents a zero or an equilibrium in NFL starting caliber quarterbacks. So anybody who's worse than Andy Dalton is not a serviceable franchise quarterback. Anybody better than Andy Dalton is a serviceable franchise quarterback. Now, this is a theory that it's not my theory originally, but I think it's a funny theory and an interesting theory, and it still applies to this day. Like, I read this article years ago about the Andy Dalton theory, and it still applies to this day. Andy Dalton represents, a franchise quarterback, and anybody who's worse than him is probably somebody that you don't want as your team's franchise quarterback, and anybody better than him is an option that is, a good option as a franchise quarterback for your NFL team. All right, now that I've explained the Andy Dalton equilibrium, the reason why I explained that is that's something that I like to reference a lot, and it's something that I might reference a lot throughout this channel. I plan on referencing it a couple of times today, so I just wanted to inform you about that theory. So let's talk about things that I learned from week 2 in the NFL. Now, the first thing I'm going to start with is Thursday night's football game, Tampa Bay versus Carolina. And something that I really learned from that game was how, Tampa Bay is a team that, they've been dogged all offseason. And, at the start of this season for having a terrible defense. We have to erase that storyline now. That's no longer true. Todd Bowles has got that defense whipped into shape. I feel like ex-head coaches who go back to coordinating always do a phenomenal job at coordinating because they just have so much less on their plate as coordinators, and Todd Bowles is no exception to this. He's got that Tampa Bay defense whipped into shape. I'm not saying it's a top 10 defense in the NFL, but it's a top 16 defense for sure. They can play ball out there, and everybody was talking in the preseason and stuff about how Jameis Winston and a lot of players on Tampa Bay's offense had a lot of potential in fantasy football, and that was partially based off of Bruce Arians showing up and being an offensive guru as the head coach of Tampa, but also that Tampa has a terrible defense, and when you've got a terrible defense, your offense is just forced to throw the ball a ton and score a lot of points in order to try to win football games. That's not the storyline anymore. Tampa has a legit defense, and we have to start respecting that defense. Now, the next thing I want to talk about that I learned in week 2 is, I have to finally admit, it's only 2 weeks into the season, and I'm ready to admit that Kyler Murray is pretty good at football. I had extremely little faith in Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals, Cliff Kingsbury, and this air raid offense doing anything this year. I was comparing them to Chip Kelly and the Eagles. I thought it was laughable that anybody even considered them, that they would be even decent at football this year. And I'm going to have to walk that back now. Kyler Murray is accurate. You saw him slinging the ball against an extremely, extremely good Baltimore Ravens defense, top 5 defense in the NFL. He was accurate. They're running a ton of plays like they were planning on. They're doing a good job over there in Arizona. Larry's getting the ball. Christian Kirk's getting the ball. They have a lot of playmakers. If David Johnson can stay healthy, he's really their only chance in the red zone. That's the one knock, is they've been terrible in the red zone. But, you have to assume that Kyler, it's only his second week in the NFL. He's only been there for such a short period of time. They're only going to get better at this point, until the end of the year. Then maybe teams will figure them out going into next year. But I think you have to realize that Arizona Cardinals are a good offensive football team. All right, now I'm going to reference the Andy Dalton equilibrium, and this is in reference to Jacoby Brissette. I think Jacoby Brissette is above the Andy Dalton equilibrium. He is a legitimate franchise starting quarterback in the NFL. I think the Colts did a phenomenal job locking him up for 2 years at $30 million for both years, $20 million guaranteed, because they're really getting a discount on Jacoby Brissette going into next year. It was a wise decision for the Colts to lock him up, and it was good for Jacoby. I mean, $20 million guaranteed. He's got life-changing money now if he gets injured or anything. But the Colts now have a franchise quarterback for a very reasonable price point for the next 2 years. The Colts have a really good defense with Darius Leonard, a solid offensive line, Marlon Mack's good. I think the Colts are a legitimate wildcard contender in the AFC. Now let's talk about the San Francisco 49ers. I think that they're the most underrated team in the NFL right now. They're still not getting any credit for going 2-0 here to start the season. But that first win of the season against Tampa Bay, where they put up 31 points, after seeing how good Tampa's defense was there in week 2, shutting down Christian McCaffrey, one of the best players in the entire league, you have to respect the fact that they put up 31 points in week 1, and then they put up 41 in week 2. So they're averaging, 2 weeks, small sample size, they're averaging 36 points per week. And putting up 41 in just such a dominating fashion against the Bengals, who the Bengals gave the Seattle Seahawks everything they could handle. In Seattle, with the 12th man present, the Bengals gave Seattle everything they could handle, and Seattle barely squeaked out of there with a victory. So I think that the Niners are the most underrated team in the NFL. I think that this is a hot take. I think they have a legitimate chance at winning the division. You have to look. The Rams barely squeaked out a victory in week 1 over the Carolina Panthers, who are utterly horrible at football. And they won in week 2, but against the Saints, and Drew Brees was down, so you don't really know about the Rams. You don't know how good they're going to be. Seattle, obviously, that win from week 1 did not age very well. Plus, they barely beat the Steelers, who are also just horrendous at football at this point. So, I mean, San Francisco this is my hot take, they might be a legitimate contender to win that division. Now, last week I was saying that the Minnesota Vikings are a top 2 team in the NFC. I'm going to have to walk that back now because Kirk Cousins is who we thought he was. He is who we thought he was. He's a guy who can't win big games. He's terrible in prime time. When a game matters the most and you need him to come through in the clutch, he just, for some reason, can't do it. He's a quality NFL quarterback, certainly above the Andy Dalton equilibrium, but he can't win the big game. And that's important. The Vikings signed him to win the big game. And, the Vikings, on paper, might have the best team in the NFL. Dalvin Cook might be the number 1 running back in the league right now. I think he could finish first. He's running wild. If he can stay healthy, Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, and then the strength of the team is the defense. Xavier Rhodes, Trey Waynes. They have a front 7 from hell. Like, they're such a stacked football team, but I have zero faith in them being able to win the big game with Kirk Cousins at QB. Next, let's talk about the Buffalo Bills. I'm back on the Bills bandwagon. I mean, I'm a Dolphins fan, so I kind of hate everybody else in the division. But, I'm kind of pulling for the Bills this year. I think they've got a really, really good team. They for sure have a phenomenal defense. And I think Josh Allen is the new Cam Newton of the NFL. He's got a big arm. He's really good with his legs. He's a threat once you get inside the 5-yard line to score. And if you have a quarterback that can run, that's just such a big advantage. Because think about it, whenever a quarterback hands off the ball or pitches the ball to a running back, when you're relying on the running back to run the ball, then you have the quarterback who's now useless after they've handed off the ball. And so that's one less blocker on the field, right? If the quarterback takes the snap and then just runs the ball himself, he has 10 blockers for him. If he pitches the ball to the running back, that running back has 9 blockers for him. So to have a quarterback that's a threat running the ball is just, it's huge. That can't be overstated. And then he's got a big arm as well, so he can stretch the field. And then, so his legs force defenses to try to put a spy in there or try to condense the box, have 7, 8 guys in the box. But you can't do that when he's got such a big arm and he can go over the top to John Brown. Now, he is wildly inaccurate, just like Cam Newton.
But the mix of the big arm and his ability to run, he's going to be able to see some favorable man-on-man coverages. He's going to be able to make a couple of throws, and they don't really need him to do a ton. They don't need the offense to do a ton on Buffalo for them to be successful. They really need to rely on the defense, hand that ball to Frank the Tank Gore, who is an ageless wonder. He's the freaking Larry Fitzgerald of running backs. So they just need to ground and pound the ball, control the clock, milk some time, play good defense, and they just need Josh Allen to make a few plays a game, which he's capable of. I like Josh Allen a lot, and I think the Bills are a legitimate wildcard contender with how terrible the Chargers have looked. I had the Chargers previously in a wildcard position because obviously I have the Chiefs winning that division. But now, looking at it, the Chargers, they only won in week 1 because Adam Vinatieri missed several kicks, and then they lost in week 2 to Detroit. I just don't think the Chargers, to this point, it's safe to say that they haven't shown very much in the NFL so far this year. I think the Bills are now probably squeaking into that second wild card spot, that 6th position in the AFC. All right, speaking of the Kansas City Chiefs, I'm going to have to walk back once again what I was saying about Patrick Mahomes. And I wasn't ever saying that I didn't think Patrick Mahomes was an elite quarterback or that he wouldn't be a top 5 quarterback. I just thought that he would regress from, the historic season that he had last year, which is a safe bet generally. If somebody has an outlier of a season, just a historic run in a year, I mean, chances are they're not going to be able to repeat it. That's just playing the averages. I didn't think I was making a bold proclamation to say that I don't think Mahomes was going to be the number 1 quarterback again this year. I got to walk that back. Patrick Mahomes is maybe, this is a bit of an overstatement, but he's maybe the most talented quarterback I've ever seen. His arm talent is just ridiculous. Like, it's so preposterous that it makes you question, like, why every other quarterback in the league isn't better. Like, his arm talent and his accuracy is so good, and he makes it look so effortless that it's, like, confusing to watch other quarterbacks play after you've watched him play. It's like what Steph Curry has done in the NBA with 3-pointers. Like, he's just changed the game. Like, and I feel like Mahomes is doing this for quarterbacks, and, just like kids growing up are watching Steph Curry shoot these 3-pointers, and they're practicing it, and I feel like there's going to be a change to basketball, as these kids grow up and become pros. We're going to see much more 3-point shooting. I think that we're going to see just gunsling on a different level. It's like Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile, After he did that, then a ton of people did it right after. Everybody thought a 4-minute mile was inhuman. It wasn't even possible. Then after one guy did it, a ton of other people were able to do it because they knew what was possible. I think Patrick Mahomes is rewriting what is possible from the quarterback position. Let's talk about Bears. Mitchell Trubisky specifically. My God, he is bad. I can't believe how bad Mitch Trubisky is. Like, the Bears are another, they're like the Vikings in that on paper, they are, maybe the best team in the NFL. They have the best defense in the NFL. Even in practicality, they have the best defense in the NFL. They're number 1 defensively. But, and on offense, they're just stacked with playmakers, a plethora of playmakers. Allen Robinson out wide, who was a top 5 wide receiver with freaking Blake Bortles as his quarterback a couple of years ago. Anthony Miller, who's, I've heard many people say that he's got shades of Odell Beckham in terms of his athleticism and ability to catch footballs. Tariq Cohen, one of the best gadget players in the league. David Montgomery, an elite rookie running back. And still, Matt Nagy, an offensive guru, an offensive mastermind, and Mitch Trubisky they just need a quarterback to play, like, well. They need that Andy Dalton equilibrium. And right now, Mitchell Trubisky is below the Andy Dalton equilibrium. He is not a franchise quarterback. It's only his 3rd year, but I'm seeing a regression from his 2nd year to his 3rd year. He was a guy like Ryan Tannehill that didn't start a ton of games in college. So you had a small sample size coming out of college, and, you're enamored by his athleticism, and you're enamored by the small sample size and the promise that you saw in that small sample size from college. And that's why he was so coveted in the draft, and everybody liked him so much. But I'm just not seeing the progression. The Bears need to, not need to now, but they need to, if he doesn't get better, they need to look for the next option for a starting quarterback. The Bears have the Redskins on Monday Night Football. I think it's Monday Night Football. Anyways, they have the Redskins in week 3. This is obviously a must win, but it's not just a must win. We must see some progression from Mitchell Trubisky, or you got to cut him from your fantasy football team. Chicago Bears need to be looking for another option at quarterback because they are built to win football right now. They are built to win a Super Bowl right now. They just need an adequate quarterback, and Mitch Trubisky is not even adequate. Now, lastly, I want to talk about the Eagles and Falcons game from last night. And I don't want to go into the X's and O's of it or anything. I just want to talk about how that was one of the greatest football games I've ever seen in my life. In week 1, we saw the Saints and the Texans in prime time, and I was gushing about that game afterwards. And rightfully so. That was a phenomenal football game. I was saying that's a game of the year contender in week 1, and how fortunate we are that it was in prime time for everybody to see. And that's how I feel about this game in week 2. I'm not saying that it was better than the Saints-Texans. I'm not sure which one was better, but I think at the end of the year, when we look at the top 5 or so, top 10 games of the NFL season, both of those games are going to be mentioned. And as football fans, we're just so lucky that it happened, that we've had 2 just phenomenal games like that in week 1 and week 2, back-to-back weeks in prime time, so everybody got to enjoy it. This wasn't lost in the shuffle of 9 games or however many games there are in the 1 o'clock time slot, the 1 o'clock Eastern time slot. This was in prime time for everybody to see. Just so many 4th down conversions, great defensive plays, exciting offensive plays, all-out blitzes, checks from quarterbacks. That was a phenomenal football game. I loved every second of it. All right, now I'm going to give you my top must-watch games for week 3. If you're going into week 3 and you're wondering what are the best matchups, this is my opinion of the top matchups, that these are games you just have to tune into. So if you're between, if you only have 1 TV or 2 TVs, these are the games that you have to make sure are on your screens. The first game I want to talk about is Titans and Jaguars. Luckily, this is a Thursday night football game, so it's in prime time. It's not, running up against other games like in lost in the shuffle of the 1 o'clock games. This is a prime time game, and this is just a game of, AFC South. This is a must win for the Jaguars. It's a really important win for the Titans if they want to try to keep pace with the Colts in the division. This is going to be a game of elite defense. If you like defensive football, this is going to be defense. This is this is going to be one of my bets of the week for take the under in this game, because this is going to be a ton of defense on a great Thursday night game. And the other game I want to talk about is the Falcons at the Colts. I think the Colts are probably my other. I said earlier, I think the Bills are going to be a wild card team in the 6th slot. I think the Colts are going to be in that 5 slot, or potentially even winning the division over the Texans. I'm in on Jacoby Brissette. I'm in on their defense. I'm in on their running game. Marlon Mack, Quentin Nelson on the offensive line. The Colts are a really good football team. And when Andrew Luck went down for the season, I was skeptical that the Colts would be able to be a playoff caliber team. Before when Luck was still there, I thought for sure they would be playoff caliber. But, as soon as he was gone, I was a little bit apprehensive. I'm walking that apprehension right back. I think the Colts are a playoff caliber team, but I think the Falcons are also a playoff caliber team, and that's in the NFC, which is a more competitive conference. The Falcons looked quite good on last night's game. They looked a little bit slow against Minnesota in week 1, but Minnesota is a tough team to play in Minnesota. That defense is elite, especially at home. This is going to be a great matchup of 2 teams that have legitimate playoff aspirations, and a nice cross-conference game. It's always fun to watch those because these teams have about zero familiarity with one another. So this is really, a game where, how good of a game plan can a coach put together on 1 week's notice? It's going to be interesting to watch. Now, my final must-watch game for week 3 is the Ravens and the Chiefs. My goodness gracious, guys. This is the Chiefs, maybe the most elite offense in the NFL. That's maybe a little bit debatable, but I'm going to say it, the most elite offense in the NFL with Patrick Mahomes at the helm. Doesn't even matter that they don't have Tyreek Hill. Patrick Mahomes is just ridiculously accurate, and he's going up against an elite defense in the Ravens, who, gave him a lot of trouble last year, if I'm remembering correctly. The Ravens, Lamar Jackson, it has just looked like the cheat code. He's looking like even better than the prime Mike Vick in terms of being able to run and throw together. He's just looked so good. The Chiefs' defense is not very good. So, I'm expecting the Ravens being able to put up a lot of points in this one. It's going to be tough for the Chiefs to put up a lot of points against this good Ravens D, but man, Patrick Mahomes and that Chiefs team is so good that they're probably going to be able to do it. I think this is an absolute shootout of a game, and I can't wait to watch it. It's my number 1 must-watch game of Week 3. All right, now I want to talk about the top suicide survivor picks. These are also locks of the week. You could take all these teams if you're feeling frisky. You could take them all, just money line and parlay all these teams, because I'm basically guaranteeing that all these teams win. First lock of the week, the number 1 lock of the week, and this is going to be a theme, is whoever's playing the Dolphins. And this week, it's the Cowboys, man. And the Cowboys, I think, are the best team in the NFC. Besides only the New England Patriots, I think that they're probably the best team in the NFL. I think Green Bay gives them a run for their money in the NFC. Those are the top 2 teams in the NFC for sure. And, the Cowboys have had a super easy schedule, and it's going to get even easier here in Week 3 so far. So it's hard to know, because they haven't had to face adversity. Like Green Bay played Chicago, best defense in the league. Minnesota, phenomenal defense, top 5 defense in the league. So Green Bay's 2-0 over 2 much more quality opponents than the lowly Giants and the terrible Redskins. But, the Cowboys have the horrible bottom floor of the NFL, the worst team in the league, the Dolphins, to play this week. That's a guaranteed victory. Now, the second lock of the week is the Patriots over the Jets. Sam Darnold's going to be gone still with mono. That's at least the speculation at this point. The Patriots are the best team in the NFL. Like I was just saying, I think, outside of maybe the Cowboys, maybe the Packers, the Patriots are the best team in the NFL. And that's even my bias. The Patriots are pretty much outright the best team in the NFL, Super Bowl favorite right now. They're going to be playing the lowly Jets. Don't even have Sam Darnold, Trevor Siemian at quarterback. I love the Patriots in this one. If you haven't used them already, like last week, they were my number 1 pick. If you haven't used them already, use them now. You can save them for later. They'll probably go, 13-3 to 15-1, somewhere in that range this season. So you're going to have a lot of chances to use the Patriots down the line. But I would use them here. They're my number 2 lock of the week. My number 3 lock of the week is the Vikings over the Raiders. Now, as I was saying earlier, Kirk Cousins can't win the big games, but this isn't a big game. This is the Raiders, who are, I think they're going to end up being a middling team. They're not going to be a bottom rung team like, the Redskins and the Giants, the Dolphins. They're not going to be a bottom rung team like that. They're going to be a nice mid-tier team this year, which is good for them. It's a process to build up towards being a great team. And I think that they've been doing a good job. I think it was smart of them to trade away Khalil Mack. They got a ton of draft capital for him. I think the Raiders are going to be a good team in the future, but right now the Vikings are a really good football team, and the Vikings at home are a nightmare for everyone. I don't know if I'm even going to favor hardly anybody in Minnesota against that defense at home, who just made Atlanta look like pure dog doo-doo. I love the Vikings over the Raiders this week. No beef to the Raiders. I just think the Vikings, and Kirk Cousins beats these middling teams, and especially that Vikings defense at home. I love the Vikings in Week 3. Now, the final lock of the week. Now, all 4 of these are absolute virtual guarantees. I would parlay all 4 of these money line. You could bet the house. These are guaranteed victories. You're not going to get the best odds or good odds at all on any of these teams, but that would be like a guaranteed win. of a bet, and I like the Packers over the Broncos here at number 4. Packers at home. This is going to be the Packers defense is now elite, very elite defense, top 10 defense, maybe even top 5 defense. This is the best defense that I've ever seen the Packers have. This is better than when they went on their Super Bowl run. When they went on their Super Bowl run there, they had a really good defense that could take chances and take the ball away, which really complemented their high-scoring offensive style because other teams on offense had to take chances. So, they had a really good defense in their Super Bowl run year there that just really complemented their offense. And, I think this year they just have an outright phenomenal defense. Jair Alexander's turning into a shutdown corner. They've got a really powerful front 7 now. I love the Packers. I think the Broncos are not good. Although they almost beat the Bears, I think that was more just the Bears being just horrendous. And also the Broncos are decent at home. But at Lambeau Field, I don't see any way that the Broncos beat the Packers. All right, now let's talk about bets that I like here in week 3. I got most of my predictions for bets I liked last week correct. One that I got wrong was the Saints, but who could have seen, if you told me Drew Brees was going to get injured on the second drive of the game, I wouldn't have taken the Saints money line, but I thought, the Rams a little bit overrated. Grudge game. I really liked the Saints there. I was wrong about it. But that's in the past now. Let's look to the future. My first bet of the week that I really like, I talked about it a little bit earlier, but it's just a simple under bet in Jacksonville versus Tennessee. It's a 40-point. The over-under is set at 40. And I got to say, unless it gets below about 38 points, I still like the under bet in this one. Thursday Night Football, notoriously bad offense, right? You have such a short period of time to prepare. Basically, all you can do is try to rehab your injuries. You don't have actual time to game plan and with traveling to the game and trying to rehab your injuries from Sunday and stuff. You just don't have time to game plan. So offenses almost always look really flat on Thursday night. And Tennessee versus Jacksonville, both these guys have absolute elite defenses. 40 points over under. I see both these. I see these teams struggling to hit double digits. We saw we saw Jacksonville and Houston. The score's 13-12 last week, and that was Houston's offense, which is much better than Tennessee's offense, and they could only score 13 points. And Jacksonville only scored 12. I just think that this is a low scoring game. These teams are going to struggle to hit double digit points. They're certainly not going to hit 20 points. I can't see them both hitting 20 points to hit the over on 40. So I love the under in this one. All right, Falcons plus 2.5 over Indy. The fact that you're getting Falcons plus points, that's huge. And you've heard me talk so much about how in this episode how I like Indy and I think that they're a playoff contender, but that's in the AFC. The NFC is a much better conference than the AFC. With Drew Brees now getting hurt, I love the Falcons to be able to win their division. The Bucks aren't very good. The Panthers aren't very good. Drew Brees is out for 6 to 8 weeks. The Falcons are going to be able to win the division, and I love them getting points on them. That's huge. That's a really promising bet. This game should be a pick'em, I think, and as long as you're gonna give the Falcons points, you have to favor the Falcons. If you're gonna give the Colts points, I would maybe like 3.5 points. But the fact that the Falcons are given points, I just love this bet. This seems almost like a lock to me. The Falcons looked really good last night against the Eagles. That was at home. Matt Ryan is a lot better at home. But I think the Falcons plus points, that's a crazy thing. That's crazy that the Falcons are underdogs in this one. Now, the last bet that I love this week, and this is probably the one I love this bet maybe even the most out of the 3 bets. I really like the under bet, and then I really like this bet. The Falcons bet is definitely my 3rd favorite bet out of the 3, although I'm very confident in that one as well. And this last bet that I'm going to talk about is the Packers -8 against the Broncos. The fact is, even if this was in Denver, I would probably like the Packers -8. The fact that it's the Packers -8 and it's in Lambeau. I mean, the Raiders beat the Broncos by 8. The Raiders, who, I mean, I'm not shitting on the Raiders, but they're a middle-level team, and they beat the Broncos by 8 in Oakland. So you're going to give Green Bay the same differential that the Raiders were able to score against the Broncos? That's just insanity to me. The Packers have an elite defense. I just don't see the Broncos offense being able to score very many points against them. And Aaron Rodgers and, Aaron Jones, oh my God, he can run the ball so well. And then Davante Adams, one of the most elite receivers in the league. I mean, I don't need to tell you about the Packers offense with Aaron Rodgers at the helm. They're an elite offense. They're a top 5 offense as long as Aaron Rodgers is there. They got a defense that's in the top 10, borderline upwards of top 5 defenses in the league. And once again, they're only favored by 8 points. The Raiders beat the Broncos by 8 points. You're going to tell me that the Packers are favored by the same amount that the Raiders beat the Broncos? I'm not shitting on the Raiders once again, but the Packers are certainly a much better team than the Raiders. So the fact that you're only going to give them 8 points and it's at Lambeau Field, I mean, that's insane. If that doesn't get to double digits, I expect that line to move as the week goes on. Until that gets to 11, 12, 13, 14 points. Once it gets to 11 points, I'm not loving that bet as much. But even at a 10 and a half points, I love the Packers in this one. That seems like a sure thing. Lock that bet up, baby. All right, now let's end this thing with some fantasy football talk. I'm trying to get this thing out for Tuesday morning so you can actually use this information to your advantage when putting in waivers for this week in fantasy football. And obviously, quarterback is a big one this week. With guys like Mitch Trubisky and Cam Newton and even Jameis Winston all just playing terrible football. Winston's got a good matchup this week, so don't give up on Winston just yet. He's got the Giants this week. If he shits the bed against the Giants, kick that guy to the curb, cut him from your team. And it's kind of the same thing with Trubisky. Maybe give him another week. He's got the Redskins this week, so maybe see if he can get it together. And if he can't get it together this week, cut his ass. Cut his ass, get him off your team. You can just stream quarterbacks week to week. Maybe even you might want to cut Trubisky anyways, but this is a week to maybe stream Trubisky. So, don't necessarily cut him right away, but Cam Newton, cut his ass, bro. Cut him. I'm cutting him. I still had him. I picked up Josh Allen this week to replace Newton in one of my leagues, and I still have Newton on the bench. His ass is cut. He's out of here. You're relying on Newton to just be a pocket passer. Think about it. They were 4th in goal, or was it 4th and 1 on the 1 yard line? And they did this sweep with the game on the line, and they do a sweep to Christian McCaffrey. All they have to do is push forward for a yard. Cam Newton has been the best ever at that. He's been the best ever at that. So if they're not even going to use him in that situation with the game on the line, and he's got negative rushing yards on the season. We have more rushing yards than Cam Newton this season. Whoever's watching this video and me, we have more NFL rushing yards than Cam Newton this season. Think about that. So you're using Cam Newton just as a pocket passer. He's wildly inaccurate. He's terrible. Unless he dumps the ball to Christian McCaffrey and McCaffrey runs 80 yards for a touchdown, he's not going to have any good passing stats for the season. So Cam Newton is a guy you just gotta cut. You gotta cut your losses. You're much better off streaming at the position. So let's talk about some good streaming options. First guy that I like for streaming, I already mentioned it. I started him last week. I had Winston in a league. I had Newton in a league. I put those guys relegated them to the bench, and I started Josh Allen over both of those guys, and he outscored both of them. Josh Allen's 12th in quarterback scoring through 2 weeks. He has an easy matchup against Cincinnati this week. I like Josh Allen as a starter. He's poised to put up some good rushing stats. Cincinnati gave up 300 yards and 3 touchdowns to Jimmy G last week. I like Josh Allen. He's my number 1 streaming option for the week. Speaking of Jimmy G, he's my number 2 streaming option for the week. Like I said earlier, they scored 31 points against Tampa, who is actually proven to be, through 2 weeks, I think a pretty good defense. And then he scored 41 points against the Bengals. So, the Niners did, not Jimmy G. But Jimmy G threw up about 300 yards. He threw up 3 touchdowns. And then they have the Steelers this week. And the Steelers are dog shit, man. They are not good at football. They got absolutely trounced by the Patriots, which, obviously the Patriots, best team in the NFL. So you didn't know how much stock to put into that. But then they gave up 300 yards and 3 touchdowns to Russell Wilson. And Wilson hasn't had passing stats like that in a long time. The Seattle ran the ball more than anybody last year. That's their formula. They run the football. And at that, Russell Wilson was able to have a field day against that Steelers defense. I just don't think that they're good at football at all. Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be available in a ton of leagues. I like him more than like a Phillip Rivers even this week. I think he's a solid streaming option here. If you don't feel good about your quarterback, Jimmy G's got your back. Oh, also, Jimmy G was the quarterback 6 last week. QB 6. Steelers are terrible. He'll be a top 12 quarterback this week. Now, another option, and this is a guy that I like. I'm starting to like a little less than the top 2 guys. So go for Allen, and then go for Garoppolo, and then you want to go for one of these next 2 guys that I'm going to talk about. So the next guy I'm going to talk about is Jacoby Brissette. Now, they have the Falcons, who have a pretty decent defense, but the Colts are going to have home field advantage in this one. And, Wentz was able to put up some pretty good fantasy points against the Falcons last night. And Wentz was able to do that without Alshon Jeffrey and without Deshaun Jackson. So the only wide receiver that he has any rapport with was Nelson Agholor. He still had Zach Ertz, but there was no Dallas Goedert, to balance out Zach Ertz. So without a couple of his, most coveted passing options, the Eagles were still able to put up 18.5 points at quarterback. That's a very reasonable amount. I think Jacoby Brissett can put up a similar amount of points. He's not going to dominate, or he doesn't have the biggest upside, but I think he's a very safe floor option for this week. I think he'll be a good choice. I like him a lot better than Rivers versus Houston. I like him a lot better than Kyler Murray versus Carolina, Russell Wilson versus New Orleans. I like him better than all those guys. Wilson versus New Orleans, I think they'll have an easy time to win that game, and they'll try to run the ball a lot more. So that'll be the factor. It's not that Wilson is a bad quarterback. It's just that they don't need him to put up stats for them to win. But Russell Wilson is a guy that is probably owned in every single league. If you got Russell Wilson, I don't like him this week. I would rather go for a streaming option instead. Now, the last option I'm going to talk about is Matt Stafford. Stafford's had a pretty good year so far. They're going up against Philly, who does have an elite front seven. So, Matt Stafford's going to get banged around. But Philly has also, got a pretty potent offense. So I expect, the Lions are going to have to score a decent amount of points here to try to keep up in this one. The Lions do have a good defense. So, they're not going to give up 40 to the Eagles. But, the Eagles are going to score in the high 20s probably, something like that. So the Lions are going to have to score a decent amount of touchdowns to try to keep up, which means, pass attempts for Matt Stafford, who has a ton of great options. TJ Hawkinson, rookie tight end, is a good option. Danny Amendola in the slot is a good option. Both those guys had really quiet weeks last week, but I think they might be able to bounce back. With how good the front seven is on the Eagles, they're going to get pressure on Stafford. Stafford's going to have to dump the ball quickly. So I think those guys are going to have some good weeks, and then he's got Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay on the outside, which is one of the better 2 wide receiver tandems in the NFL that, doesn't really get talked about. Once again, like, I don't love Stafford. He's a top 15 type of play to me. I just think that he's a lot better than a lot of guys who are going to be rostered that you probably have on your roster, like I was saying, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, Cam Newton, Mitch Trubisky. A lot of these guys that are owned in much larger percentages, I think it's just going to be a more reliable choice this week than a lot of those guys. So that's why I like Stafford. Now on to running backs. First guy I'm going to talk about is Jaylen Samuels. James Conner getting hurt. It looks like he's probably gonna. It looks like he's not too badly hurt, and he's probably gonna be able to play. But when you go down like that, and you have to miss the remainder of a game, obviously his knee is hurting him. Obviously, it's uncomfortable. So is he going to be? What version of James Conner are we going to see? Are we going to see a 70%, 60%, 90%? If it's 70, 60, 50, if it's something in there, then he's not going to be nearly as productive, especially with Mason Rudolph there. Teams are going to give less respect to the throwing game, and they're going to play the run a lot tougher. So I just think Samuels is going to be the more efficient running back going forward, which is going to lead to more touches. And if James Conner gets hurt any worse, then Samuels is the number one guy. And so to have the number one guy on that offense, or in any offense for that matter, is a very valuable player to have. Jaylen Samuels is not very well owned. He's also a quality receiver out of the backfield. So he's just a guy you should pick up. I'm not saying to start him, but pick him up to have on the roster, to have on the bench. And, let's see, let's evaluate Connor's knee week by week and see what we have with Samuels. And I think he could be a guy that might work his way into your starting lineup. Now, the next guy I want to talk about is Raheem Mostert. I was talking about him last week, and so I'll talk about him again this week. It's obvious Kyle Shanahan likes a running back by committee, and it's really frustrating now because, Jeff Wilson had a couple of touchdowns, but Mostert had a good week. He had a touchdown. And, I think that he's outperforming Breida at this point. I think he's probably the running back to own out of that backfield if you are going to own one of them. He's got good receiving capability. And so he's the most versatile running back on that roster, which is why I like him. In a running back by committee type of situation, I think that owning the most versatile guy or the goal line guy are the best guys to own. Wilson seems like he might be the goal line guy, but, that's up in the air. I think Mostert is the guy to own out of these three. I'm not saying, once again, that he's a guy that you should be playing week in and week out, but he's a guy that might be a pretty safe play during the bye weeks, which are starting to come up. San Fran's got their bye in week 4. So, starting in week 5, he could be a guy that could be filling in your bye weeks. You might want to roster him now before, if he has another good game here in week 3, it's going to be a lot harder to get him. Now, the last guy I want to talk about is the ageless wonder himself, Frank the Tank Gore. With Devin Singletary getting a little banged up in that game, that's just increasing Frank Gore's, touch floor and his potential. And he's already got a really solid touch floor. And with the way that the Buffalo Bills like to run their entire team, I should say, they like to play good defense, and then they want to ground and pound, control the tempo of the game, slow the game down so that you can play at their pace. And Frank Gore, the only guy that he's losing goal line touches to is Josh Allen. But Frank Gore's got a really, really safe floor. He's like a 15 to 20 touch per game floor at the moment. Frank Gore's going to get 3 yards a carry. It's nothing sexy, but he's got good touchdown upside, like I was saying. And he's a solid high floor flex play. And he's got a pretty low ceiling, but I mean, he could bang in 2 or 3 touchdowns in a given week and give you a boom sort of week. But you're really playing Frank Gore to get that high floor, and he's going to deliver 15 to 20 touches a week, 3 yards per carry, which offers a decent floor. All right, now the wide receiver position. This is one where every week there's like 10 guys because it's such a volatile position at wide receiver. You see a guy have a huge week, and you get enamored by him and you want to pick that guy up. But I'm going to just try to give a few names. The first name is a guy who had a huge week, Demarcus Robinson. Obviously, I think that owning the second wide receiver or owning any piece of that Kansas City offense, they're just such a potent offense over there. Owning any piece of that offense is, a necessity. There should be no piece of that offense that's left on the waiver wire, which is why Demarcus Robinson's my number one for this week. I talked about Mecole Hardman last week. I think Robinson is above Mecole. We didn't consider that last week, but now you have to consider that. You have to consider that Robinson's got more rapport. He's been with Mahomes. He's been in the league longer. Hardman is a rookie. He's still learning the offense. He's learning the ropes and everything. So Robinson seems like the much safer bet out of the two of them, although they should both be owned. Every piece of that Kansas City offense should be owned going forward. Anybody on that offense could boom on any given week. But I actually think Demarcus Robinson also offers, and especially until Tyreek Hill comes back, he offers a pretty decent target floor, which a decent target floor with Patrick Mahomes throwing you the football is, that's just somebody that needs to be owned in fantasy football. The next guy, James Washington. It's very obvious now that Dante Moncrief is not the second wide receiver in Pittsburgh. Dante Moncrief, it's always a red flag when a guy's on multiple teams in multiple years. I think he's been on 3 teams in the last 3 years. So obviously every team doesn't have a problem just moving on from Dante Moncrief. That should tell you what kind of a player he is and what his potential is. Meanwhile, James Washington actually played college football with Mason Rudolph, the new quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, for the remainder of the season, unless obviously if Rudolph gets hurt or something. So they already have a rapport with one another. Washington is going to be his preferred target. Obviously, Juju's still the number 1, but Washington is now the clear number 2. I thought Rudolph looked really good in week 2, to be honest. I actually thought he looked better than Ben Roethlisberger. I know, hot take, but I think that the Steelers are actually better off playing with Rudolph for the remainder of this season than Roethlisberger. And I think it's a good thing. I don't wish any ill health or anything on Ben Roethlisberger, but it's kind of a good thing that he got hurt because now there's no media story about a quarterback controversy, that he got hurt and he's out for the year, because I think after how well Mason Rudolph played there, in the second half in week 2 there, that if they went back to Roethlisberger and he didn't, he had another bad half or something, it would have been quarterback controversy, media frenzy. So I think this is kind of beneficial. And the main beneficiary on that offense, the only guy that I like more now that Roethlisberger's out, is James Washington. I'm not saying pick him up and start him, but pick him up, have him on the bench. Let's see how he does in week 3. I expect a pretty good target share for him going forward. And if we see that in week 3, he could be a start-worthy guy moving forward. All right, now let's talk about Nelson Agholor. Obviously, Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson both went down last night. Deshaun Jackson's kind of got some injury history. So does Jeffrey, actually, for that matter. We don't know the severity of the injuries still. But even if they can both come back, they'll probably be diminished versions of themselves, and they'll be more, not necessarily decoys in the offense, but they'll be able to draw the main coverage, while Nelson Agholor is going to still be, a healthy, good option for it that Carson Wentz is comfortable with and has a rapport with, that he can use out of the slot. I like Nelson Agholor a lot. I think he's a guy that needs to be owned in all leagues, and I think he could be a 1,000-yard receiver at this point for the rest of the season. All right, now the last guy I want to talk about is Randall Cobb. With Michael Gallup getting hurt and being out for a few weeks, Randall Cobb is now the number 2 wide receiver in that potent Dallas Cowboys offense, led by OC Kellen Moore. They're much more imaginative now in Dallas. This isn't the old boring ground and pound Dallas offense. And Dak Prescott's looked much more accurate this year than he ever has. It looks like he's taken a serious step forward. I don't know if this is just because of Kellen Moore's imaginative offense, or because if they just played bad teams, and the Giants and the Redskins through a couple of weeks. But I think that Dak Prescott's looking better than he's ever looked. Getting a chance to own the number 2 wide receiver in that offense for free off of waivers is a very intriguing prospect. I think if you can get Randall Cobb, he's pretty much like a good flex start, wide receiver 3 type of start until Michael Gallup gets back, especially in PPR type of formats, playing out of the slot. He's going to be a nice player. All right, tight end just quickly, because tight end's a weird position. There's nobody out there that's going to give you consistent production. You're basically looking for a guy, if you're streaming or you've had OJ Howard and you got burnt 2 weeks in a row. You want a guy that's going to, that offers, a decent touchdown upside. Here's just a few names to look at. Jason Witten, he scored touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. He knows how to get open. Dak feels comfortable, at the goal line. He knows how to, sell a play-action block and then get open. He knows how to run an option route. He knows how to just do like the little sneaky veteran things to get open at the goal line. And Dak Prescott likes to use them down there. He knows that Jason's sly. He feels comfortable using him. Jason Witten looks like, that year off probably helped him health-wise and everything. Witten's got, good touchdown upside basically every single week. Another guy, Tyler Eifert. Eifert, a few years ago when he was able to stay healthy, is like a top 5 tight end. And the knock on Eifert has been that he hasn't been able to stay healthy. Well, it's week 3 now. He's still healthy. Get him while he's hot, basically, until he suffers an injury and then regresses and isn't out there on the football field. He's a decent touchdown option that Andy, he's a big body. Andy Dalton can rely on him in the red zone. And, Dalton's got to throw the ball a lot. The Bengals have to throw the ball a lot to try to score. I like him as a touchdown upside type of player. And then the last guy, well, not the last guy. Another guy I want to talk about is Will Disley with the Seahawks. He's just another guy, offers touchdown upside in the red zone. They don't have, DK Metcalf, I guess, is going to be maybe a red zone threat for them to throw the ball to. But besides DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett's not a great red zone guy. They don't have great red zone options for throwing. And, the Seattle likes to run the ball as much as anybody, if not more than anybody, maybe the Ravens. So to have, I think Disley's probably the number 1 red zone target at this point, because you haven't seen DK Metcalf. The sample size isn't there for him yet. So I think Disley's probably their best red zone option at this point. And like I said, with tight end, you're just looking for a touchdown upside. You're not going to get a consistent production guy off the waiver wire. There's like 4 consistent production guys in the NFL, Ertz, Kelsey, Kittle. That's about it. Like consistent production isn't a thing at tight end unless you have one of those guys. So you're really just looking for a touchdown upside guy. Here's another touchdown upside guy for you, Kaden Hurst. Baltimore, Lamar Jackson loves to use the tight ends. Kansas City, who Baltimore has in week 3, has been notoriously one of the worst, if not the worst, against defending tight ends in the NFL last year and so far this year. Obviously, Mark Andrews is the number 1 option, but he's probably owned in your league, in the majority of the leagues. So Hayden Hurst, they use 3 tight ends there in Baltimore. Lamar Jackson loves to throw the ball to all of them. Hayden Hurst scored a touchdown last week. He's got touchdown upside every single week. And finally, the last guy I want to talk about is Cameron Brate with Tampa Bay. For some reason, Jameis Winston doesn't like OJ Howard. OJ Howard, everybody was touting as, a top 5 tight end. I did draft him in one of my leagues, and he's absolutely burnt me through back-to-back weeks. Cam Brate, for some reason, Jameis has always just favored him. He's always out-targeted Cam compared to Howard. Even though Cam plays less snaps, runs less routes, he gets targeted more. So Winston is going to target him. They have the Giants this week. That's a favorable matchup. If you want a guy who has touchdown upside, I'm not saying that, Cameron Brate could score 0 points for you, but if you need like a guy with touchdown upside and you couldn't get any of those other guys that I've talked about so far, Cameron Brate's a good choice for, a 1-week option. And finally, defense and special teams. Do this one pretty quickly. top two options are the Titans and the Jaguars. If they're available, it's likely that they probably aren't because those are two elite defenses. They shouldn't be available. But if they are, I expect big things out of both those defenses on Thursday night. I've already talked about it. I love the under bet in that game. I just don't see any offensive production happening for either team. Both teams have absolute elite defenses. I expect both these DSTs to be solid streaming options, solid starting options if you already have them on your team here in week 3. Now, this next option is a bit of a head scratcher, but I like the Seahawks. They're going to get to play the Saints this week with no Drew Brees. Teddy Bridgewater didn't look great. I think Bridgewater's a decent quarterback. I don't know where he falls in that Andy Dalton equilibrium. He's probably right around there. I would say he's a bit below it for now, but he's got a chance to prove himself now over the next 6 weeks, and he's going to have the opportunity to train all week as the starter, prepare as a starter. But he made some bad decisions in that game against the Rams. The Seahawks have them at home with the 12th man backing up that defense. So I like the Seahawks for a 1-week start here. I think that if there's ever a week in the entire season to start them, this is probably the week. So get them while they're hot. And the last streaming option for the week is the 49ers. I probably like them better than the Seahawks, so I should have probably said this before the Seahawks. I definitely like them better than the Seahawks. The Niners have low-key been real good on defense this year. With Nick Bosa in there, they've got a good pass rush, good sacking potential. They still got Sherman out there at corner. And the fact is that they're playing the Steelers, who have been a sorry-ass football team this year. They're not very good on either side of the football. They're going to have Mason Rudolph, who I think is actually an upgrade maybe on Ben Roethlisberger. But I just don't think that he's going to have a good week here in his first start of his career, or first start of this season at least. I think it's the first start of his career. And the Steelers are just they're a joke this year. This is another one. This is that's as good as a matchup as San Francisco is going to get. And San Fran's D has actually been a lot better than you probably even realize so far this season. All right, folks. So that does it for this episode of Joel Embiid Talks NFL Week 3 edition. And please like the video if you did enjoy this. Like the video even if you didn't enjoy it, just give me the like. It helps out a lot. Subscribe to the channel. That also helps out a lot. Building that number up. I'm really trying to build up that subscriber number. And please comment below any questions you have about fantasy football. I would love to answer them. About gambling. Any disagreements you have with anything I said. I'd love to have a discussion with anybody who's watching this. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment below, and follow me on Twitter at MPTalks. That'll be in the description box below. And until next time, cheers, friends.